What's up, my friend? Welcome back to another video. And today we're going to talk about a really important concept in orchestration, especially MIDI orchestration, because there's a lot of flexibility in this topic, and that is blending and doubling, how to combine different instruments together. I've done a previous video on the channel about how to combine the individual sections like strings and the different instruments in the woodwinds and the brass, so definitely check that out if you have the time. But in this one, I want to talk more about in context of a piece, kind of like why you would want to double, and then show you a couple of examples here in my track called Love's Rapture. Before we quickly do that, though, in case you haven't checked out my free workshop called The Complete Composer's Framework, I highly recommend doing so. It goes through the complete process from coming up with your initial idea all the way to the polished final master, and I'll walk you step by step how to actually get there, plus a whole bunch of valuable information on MIDI orchestration. I'll show you my virtual orchestration roadmap, like my process for going through mockups every single time. It's jam-packed with so much value, and I want to give it to you absolutely free as a thank you for checking out this video today. So if you click the first link in the description box below, you'll grab it straight there, and you can watch it instantly. It's on demand, so you can watch it anytime, and I just want to give you access to that totally free. So with that being said, let's kind of jump on into this video about blending. And first of all, maybe let's just address the why. Like, why would you want to blend instead of just using, traditional sections, like just the strings, just the woodwinds, etc.? The first reason is to add more definition, specifically combining like an ensemble with a solo instrument. That would be the main reason for doing so, is because maybe you like the thickness of an ensemble section, but if you want a little bit more detail and clarity in the overall sound, then layering in a solo instrument, especially in your MIDI samples, would make a lot of sense. For example, a violin section that's recorded as a section, let's say a 16 to 20 piece violin section, it's going to have a really creamy sound that sounds like they're playing together in a really beautiful way, and that overall homogeny in the sound is really rich. Now, if you bring in a solo violin and turn that up a little bit in the mix, naturally that detail in that solo instrument is also going to enhance and combine with that ensemble sound to create a bit more detail in that overall sound. So maybe I'll show you a quick example here. In my piece Love's Rapture, at the very end, I have a couple solo instruments here. So I have the solo violin, 1, 2, viola, cello, and just these 4 from CSSS, so Cinematic Studio Solo Strings. And let me just play that for you really quickly here. See if I can find where it is exactly. Right here. So it comes in basically right here. So right, so you hear the individuality in those strings. It's nice and intimate. It feels very close, and they're not really playing that intensely either. So the vibe that we get is a quieter, more mellow, more relaxed feel with those solo instruments. Now, if we combine that with the ensembles, it sounds like this. So right here. Right after here, bar 86. Right, there's a bit of extra thickness there. If I mute or if I unsolo and I only hear the ensembles. Right, you can tell that those are ensemble instruments, right? They're recorded as an ensemble. So that combined with the solos together, that adds that extra bit of thickness because they are playing slightly different parts. But overall, the combination of ensemble plus solo just adds a little bit more detail into the arrangement, making it feel a little bit more intimate than just an ensemble patch. Okay, so that's the idea there. So yeah, just so you can see here, I have the solo from CSSS again. Maybe we just go from here. And this is accompanying a solo English horn, by the way, so the arrangement is very sparse. And then for these 3 chords, that's when the ensemble comes in with those 3. So if we look up here in the MIDI for the ensemble patches, you can see it's literally just violins, 2, violas, and cellos coming in for that moment right here. And then the ensemble finishes up here with all its different parts. And then here in the solo, let's see if we have them playing here as well. So we don't. You can see here, the solo parts are no longer playing in this latter half except for the very last note. But we go from solo to ensemble, right? So the solo is the predominant texture, and now after this, the ensemble takes over. So it basically warms it up a little bit more and makes it feel a little bit bigger with a nice warm finish. Okay, and maybe we'll put that in context with the solo English horn as well, so we can hear that theme. So you can see the solo English horn is here. So right here, it's just the horn and the piano down here. So let's keep in mind or stay tuned to where the solo strings come in right here. Now we have the ensembles coming in as well. And the strings. And now the ensemble takes over. Right, so the solo strings add that little touch of intimacy and it warms up the arrangement a little bit more, but it makes sense because the overall arrangement was sparser in general with the English horn and the solo piano as the only two instruments there. So that's the reason I didn't go for ensemble here right away in the last section, is because I wanted to still draw on that more intimate sound, which is what you get from a solo instrument. But then when those last three chords came in with the ensemble, then it warms it up a little bit more, but you still hear the detail in those solo strings. So practically, you want to go into your session, like play around with a patch. You know, if it's CSSS, play a violin ensemble patch, but then layer in a solo violin from CSSS if you have it as well, and then hear how that kind of affects the sound, how it kind of thickens it up a little bit, but you also have that detail in that solo string in unison, basically. So that's the first reason why you would want to blend, is to add more definition to your overall sound. The second would be to create a new texture entirely. Maybe it's just to enhance a certain texture. You want to create sort of a new sound. And that is really useful if you have multiple sections together, like for example, strings and woodwinds or strings and brass, woodwinds and brass. You can put together different types of instrument sounds that either complement each other really well or contrast really well, you know? So the more similar in timbre two instruments are, the more or the less you'll be able to distinguish the differences between them. Think about, for example, cellos and bassoons. Like they have a pretty similar range in terms of how like high and low they can play, but they can both be pretty warm as well. So if the cellos aren't playing super gritty, they're playing a bit more lyrically, pulling the strings slowly, and the bassoon is also playing as well, then they can combine really beautifully, and it just sounds like a thicker cello section. Same with like a French horn, playing more mellow, and a bassoon as well. Putting those together creates a more buttery, rounder sound, but you don't necessarily hear the differences between those two instruments if they're playing at a similar dynamic level. So in this case, I decided to combine the violin ensemble with flute. So this is what the violin sounds like on its own. Right? So a very, very string heavy sound, of course. Now I wanted to put the flute in there as well. Let's hear the flute on its own quickly here. This is from CSW, by the way. So there's that consistency in the same hall and the sound, the same sort of tone signature. Right? And then together. So basically you hear the pulling of the strings, like the bow against the strings, but you also get the breathiness and the body of the flute sound combined with that violin sound. So in my opinion, it kind of thickens it up, but it also creates a slightly more full sound in the strings. It's not quite as stringy, more as nasally, but you get a fuller, buttery sort of sound. And that's really important when you are combining textures, especially in unison. If you have them in different intervals, like especially an octave apart or more, then of course the ear is going to be able to hear the differences between those two instruments because they're literally so far apart and register. But if they're in unison, then it's more of the timbres that are changing and mixing together. And that's what you really want to consider when you're choosing what instruments to combine. So creating a new texture, especially when you blend across different sections, that's when the timbre becomes really, really important to consider. And you have to ask yourself, why am I actually combining these two different instruments? Am I trying to create a thicker texture overall, a more homogeneous sound, or am I trying to contrast different timbres together and really make it stand out? That's completely up to you. But in my case, I just wanted to enhance and create a slightly thicker texture in the violins. And I did that by going with the flute there as well to create, more body, more fullness in the sound. And I think it works really well. And then the last reason you would want to do it is basically to just thicken the overall sound. Because obviously, if you just have one section versus combining multiple, then the sound is going to get thicker. It's going to get louder and richer. So this, I'm talking more about blending in unison versus octaves or different intervals. So if we just hear the violins on their own at the end of this section, they're playing the melody, but they're pretty high up, right? So the rest of the frequencies that are higher and lower are not necessarily having the melody. So if I want it to be really strong, then I can layer in an octave, maybe an octave below, and I use the Tina Guo cello for that. Right. So you can hear how Tina Guo's cello layers an octave below, but it really stands out on its own and thickens the melody overall. And overall, that helps it to protrude further into the mix. So if we put that in context. Okay. And I think I also put the 3 violins legato from Vista in there as well with the main theme. Yeah, so that combined with CSS also makes the original CSS sound thicker too. If we take out the Vista, it's a little bit thinner. Put it back in. Has a bit of extra body, right? And then put in the Tina as well. Now you get just an overall thicker sound in the high theme, but then you also get the support in the lower octave as well from the cello there. And then these other ones are basically supporting harmonically. Playing counter melodies and so on. Right. So ultimately, I think blending and combining instruments comes down to these couple things, especially the first two. Do you want to add more definition, or are you happy with the initial thickness of the sound? Right? If you want more definition, if you want more detail in general, then adding in a solo instrument or two might be a good idea, because then it can help protrude a little bit further. It adds more detail because that solo sample has been recorded in isolation. So when you blend it with the ensemble, you can adjust, of course, to taste, but you're going to hear that soloist a little bit as well in the mix there. So that can add a bit more definition. Number 2 is just creating or enhancing a certain texture, especially across different sections. Again, keep in mind that the more different the timbres are, the more they're going to stand out from each other, whether or not they're playing in unison or at different intervals, different octaves apart. So again, like something like a string, like a violin and a flute, like a violin section and a solo flute playing in unison will sound pretty nice together. Maybe it just thickens the overall string sound a little bit, versus a flute and a harmon mute trumpet. Those have very, very different timbres. So that's going to be much more contrasting. You're going to hear that difference immediately, right? So definitely keep that in mind as well. What is the timbre you're going for? Are you trying to create a different sort of texture? Are you trying to keep it relatively the same, but just enhance it? Then you want to choose a slightly closer, similar timbre that you might have across the different instruments. So there we go. Hopefully that was helpful. Gives you a couple of ideas. It is very subjective, to be fair, and there really is no right or wrong. But I think if you approach it from those two sort of questions, then it helps a lot and it simplifies things down quite a bit. So let me know if that made any sense. I hope so. Let me know if you have any additional similar things you want me to cover in future videos. More than happy to touch on that. And of course, if you haven't checked out the on-demand workshop, the Complete Composers Framework, just yet, I would love for you to do so. Again, it's completely free, and it goes through my step-by-step process of how to go from the initial idea to the completed master, and I give you tips and tricks for every single step. Again, I'll also give you my virtual orchestration roadmap as well, which is kind of my 3-step process for approaching my mock-ups in general, and I want to give that to you. It's super valuable, jam-packed, full of good stuff, and you can check it out for free using the first link in the box below as a gift to you for watching this video. So thank you so very much. I'll catch you in the next one, and I'll see you very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.